never made it, but I know what it takes. I'm motivated by a mix of emotion. Got my statement, and I'm reading it slow so I can understand it fully. Appreciate my standing, go out of this world and right on time. Oh, never in my life have I seen the sky light up like this. I'm far away from Earth and I wanna know if you exist. Mission control, do you read me? Send me my coordinates lately. Mission control, am I drifting? Tie me to someone who will love me, yeah. Wait, I think I'll last a bit longer. Fine.
Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd family part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. Happy Sunday to everybody out there. I'm recording this video so late on a Saturday night or so early on a Sunday morning because I watched the 10:45 game on ESPN between Oregon State and Arizona. Now, I make it a rule of thumb here on the channel to not talk about and not mention the games that come on that late because some people can't stay up that late and watch the games, and you watch them the next morning when you wake up. And I don't want to come on here and basically give spoilers on who wins the game, but I did stay up and watch that game, so it's after 2 a.m. Eastern time during the recording of this video, but it's still Sunday, so happy Sunday to everybody. Let's talk about some of the games from yesterday. You know the drill. I talk about the games that either ended up being close or were supposed to be close and weren't. Whether it's two good teams playing or two bad teams, it doesn't matter. But I'm not going to come on here and waste your time talking about a game that was over with by the first quarter. Florida State destroyed Wake Forest 41-16. And the only reason I bring that game up, even though it was pretty much over with before it started, is because Florida State continues to look very, very impressive. And poor Wake Forest is just a shell of their former selves. It's hard to believe that a team could go from as good as they were last year to what they are this year. It's almost like Wake Forest and Clemson are competing to find out who can be worse this year after being so good last year. In an upset, Kansas defeated Oklahoma 38-33. Now, Kansas scored with about a minute to go in the game to win the game, but Oklahoma has to hope that they don't let last year revisit them this year. And what I mean by that is, if you recall, last year Oklahoma started out 5-0 and then I believe lost their last 7 games. Well, this year they started out 6-0, I believe, and then they struggled and looked so bad against Central Florida last week, but hung on to win by 2. And then yesterday they lose to Kansas, so now they're 7-1, but they cannot afford to collapse this year the way they did last year, because even though they lost to Kansas, they've still got an outside shot of making the playoffs, but they cannot lose again. But for whatever reason, Oklahoma just comes out of the gate strong, and then as the year goes on, instead of getting better, they get worse. And a game that everybody thought was going to be a blowout was not. That's Penn State and Indiana. Penn State wins 33-24, but it was actually 24-24 with about 2 minutes to go in the game, and Penn State scores 9 points late in the game. But after losing to Ohio State last week, Penn State needed a get-right game, and you thought this was it. You thought, well, that's a game that team's bad enough to where that loss last week ain't going to hurt Penn State twice. They'll get over that loss and move on, but they look pretty bad. Boston College defeated UConn 21-14. Boston College was bad when the year started, but as the year's gone on, they have gotten better and better and better. A team you got to give a lot of credit to, Northwestern. They defeated Maryland 33-27. Now, Maryland started out, I think, 5-0, and they've lost 3 in a row. But Northwestern, of course, is going through a coaching change. Don't even have a full-time head coach right now. And they were so bad last year, and then they had all this off-the-field stuff with their former coach that happened in the middle of the offseason, and you thought they were going to be terrible this year. They've actually been a pretty good football team. Texas A&M defeats South Carolina 30-17. If South Carolina doesn't beat Jacksonville State this upcoming Saturday, they may not win another game. West Virginia over Central Florida 41-28. NC State defeats Clemson 24-17. Now, it's the third straight game that Clemson's only scored 17 points in regulation. They defeated Wake Forest 17-12. And of course, last week they were tied with Miami 17-17 at the end of regulation. And then yesterday they lose 24-17. So Clemson went into the game averaging only 19 points a game against Power 5 competition. That goes down by only scoring 17 yesterday. It's the first time since November of 2011 that they've lost back-to-back games in the regular season. I'll go ahead and say it becomes 3 in a row next week. I just don't see any way this team beats Notre Dame next week. Our run block on the offensive line is bad. Our defense is good, but unlike the past defenses, this team defense is good, but just does not create turnovers, and our offense turns the ball over way too much. We do not have one single leader on the football field. Nobody wants to step up and take accountability. I just don't see any way they beat Notre Dame. The funny part is all the Clemson fans are frustrated, and understandably so. How can you go from winning 10 games or more, 12 straight years, to all of a sudden this year's team may not go to a bowl game? It's a high possibility they don't go to a bowl game. So it can be frustrating to go from being that dominant for so long to being this pitiful. But a lot of times in football or any other sport, they say it's better to be lucky than good. Clemson's had luck on their side for a long time. This year, they don't. I mean, everything is going against them. Down to down, this is not a bad football team. If you watch them play, down to down, they can be a top 5 football team. As a matter of fact, the Football Power Index has them inside the top 20. I think the Sagarin rankings have them inside the top 30. But on the crucial downs, they're pitiful. If they get the first and goal from the 1, they're going to fumble. If they line up for a chip shot field goal for a chance to win the game, they're going to miss it. If it's late in the half and they're driving to score points, they're going to fumble. If it's late in the half and they're driving to score points, they're going to throw a pick. So on the crucial downs, they're terrible. But on a down-to-down basis, they're not a bad football team. But Dabo fired Brandon Streeter last year to bring in Garrett Riley. And Brandon Streeter was a Clemson man. He played there, went to school there, graduated from there, coached there. I mean, he's about as Clemson could be. But Dabo fired him because he thought the offense could be better with Garrett Riley. But now we've got an offensive line coach who played for Clemson, a running back coach who played for Clemson, and a wide receiver coach who played for Clemson that people say Dabo won't fire because they're Clemson men. But why would he fire Brandon Streeter when he was a Clemson man, but he won't fire these guys because they're Clemson people? It's just people trying to find something to complain about because we don't know what the issue is. But there will be some changes in the offseason. But there's been a rumor for years that Dabo has told all the coaches on the entire coaching staff on both sides of the ball that he will fire every one of them if he thinks it'll make the team better. So if he thinks that'll make the team better, he'll do it. But I just don't know exactly what to fix first. When you can't run block and you can't catch and you can't run the ball consistently and your defense don't create turnovers and your offense turns the ball over, what exactly do you go after first? But there's a big chance this team does not go to a bowl game. I think they beat Georgia Tech and I think they beat South Carolina. If so, that gives them 6 wins. But if you told me right now they go 4-8, I wouldn't disagree with you. And a game that everybody thought was going to be close ended up not being close. It was 2 ranked teams. One of them has not moved the ball on offense consistently all year long, but their defense has been really good, and so you thought it would make them stay in the game. It didn't. Oregon all over Utah, 35-6. Memphis defeats North Texas, 45-42. Memphis had, I believe, 600 yards of offense in that game and still almost lost. But they're now 6-2 on the season. Miami has to go to overtime for the second straight week to win for the second straight week. Last week, they went to overtime 17-17 against Clemson. Yesterday, they go to overtime 23-23 with Virginia. Miami wins 29-26. In a game that so many people thought was going to be close, but I never did. Georgia defeated Florida 43-20. I believe last year's score was Georgia 42, Florida 20, and that's one of those games that so many people say, in a game like this, throw out the record books. But that's just something people say to try to sound intelligent. Guess what? The record books matter. The record books tell you that Georgia is way better than Florida, and they're way better than Florida. People say stuff like that to try to make rivalries seem so much better than what they sometimes are. But typically, as they always say, most of the time the better team wins, and Georgia's just a better team. I can remember in the year, I believe 2000, when Lou Holtz was coaching South Carolina, they were 0-10 going into the Clemson game, and so many folks said, well, in a game like this, the records don't matter. And guess what? Clemson beat South Carolina because South Carolina was terrible. So sometimes the records do mean something. If the record books tell you that one team is better, they're usually better. Now, if they're marginally better, that's one thing. But if one team is way better than the other team, typically the record books tell you that team's going to win the game. Auburn finally gets a little bit of an offense. They beat Mississippi State 27-13. Tulane defeats Food 30-28. USC's defense is just an absolute abomination. They beat California 50-49 because it was 50-43, and California scored with 58 seconds to go in the game, I think it was, and decided that instead of kicking the PAT to hopefully go to overtime, they'd go for 2. They go for two, but don't get it. USC wins, but their defense is just an absolute embarrassment. Louisville shuts out Duke 23-0. I bring that game up because Louisville has a pretty good chance of being the team to lose to Florida State in the ACC championship game. Minnesota defeats Michigan State 27-12. I just like talking Minnesota because I like talking about their quarterback because his name is Ethan Kaliakmanis. That's just an odd, strange first and last name. But the Minnesota running back had 40 carries for over 200 yards, and a 40 carry game for a running back is just something you don't see anymore in college football. Nebraska defeats Purdue 31-14. I didn't think Purdue was going to score in this game, but they scored some late in the game. But that Nebraska defense looks really, really good. But as always with Matt Rhule, he shows improvement right away, and Nebraska has gotten better and better as the year has gone on. Iowa State defeats Baylor 30-18, and that puts Iowa State at 5-3 on the season, and I believe they were 4-8 last year, so they've already showed improvement from last year. Arkansas State defeats Louisiana Monroe 34-24. I only bring that up because we know Arkansas State is coached by Butch Jones. Well, earlier in the year, right after the whole Mel Tucker Michigan State fiasco, there was a radio station, I believe in Detroit, that was taking calls about who the fans think should be the next coach of Michigan State. And some fan called in and said Butch Jones, and I thought the host of the show was going to have a heart attack. And the only way I know about that is because I watch so much sports stuff that happened to pop up on my YouTube homepage. But if you have not watched that, I encourage you to go find it because it's the funniest thing. I thought the host was going to die just because somebody said the name of Butch Jones. Tennessee defeats Kentucky 33-27. Now, Tennessee's offense has not been near as good as last year, but their defense has been so much better. So going into that game, you thought, well, Kentucky ain't really had a great offense this year, and Tennessee's defense has been really good, so this should be a low-scoring game, and it wasn't. But Tennessee does hang on for the win. Coastal Carolina all over Marshall 34-6. Appalachian State in a slugfest, they defeat Southern Miss 48-38. Ohio State 24, Wisconsin 10. Washington, for the second straight week, plays down to the competition. Last week, in a low-scoring game, they beat Arizona. Last night, they beat Stanford 42-33. UCLA defeats Colorado 28-16. And then a team that for a while everybody thought had a pretty good team, even though I've said for years that Mack Brown is basically the same exact coach as Jimbo Fisher. They're 8-4 head coaches. But North Carolina started out really good this year, and then they lost last week to Virginia by giving up 31. But going into last week's game, their defense had played pretty good this year. So they lost last week. You thought, well, no big deal. They just did what a lot of teams do. They lost a game to a team they had no business losing to. And then last night they lose again. Georgia Tech beats them 49-46. So the North Carolina defense is starting to look like the old North Carolina defense. And they're not done losing. They'll lose at least one more. So they'll go from being a 6-0 team to probably about an 8-4 team, which is about what Mack Brown always does. But it looked like this year's team was going to be improved because their defense was playing pretty good. And now all of a sudden, the last 2 weeks, it's struggling. Any thoughts on any of this, please feel free to let me know. A lot of people think that Jim Harbaugh is going to leave Michigan after this year because of this current fiasco going on, because it seems like for the past 4 or 5 years, every time you turn around, there's something going on between Jim Harbaugh and the NCAA. And for Michigan's sake, if they keep investigating this, if they find anything out, they might as well just go ahead and either take themselves out of the playoffs or let the Big Ten do it for them. Because if they keep investigating and finding more and more stuff, if Michigan goes to the playoffs and then wins the whole doggone thing, all they're going to do is come back 2 months later and take the title away from them. So we'll have no 2023 national champion. And if they let them keep it, there'll be an asterisk beside it. And people are always going to say, oh, it's tainted, they cheated. So if they keep investigating this and they find anything out, they might as well just go ahead and take themselves out. And if they do find anything out and they get punished any kind of way by the Big Ten, Jim Harbaugh will leave when the season is over with. But the one thing that makes them look bad right now is the fact that the guy that was doing this, who I believe his name is Connor Stallion, which is a great name, by the way, was caught buying tickets to 10 different teams' games last year. And it was 10 teams that either they knew they were going to play because they were on their schedule, or they might play them in the playoffs. And in every one of those games, the Michigan defense looked really good. But the one team that they did not buy a ticket to go watch was TCU, because if you remember, up until the very last weekend, nobody thought they were going to playoffs. And Michigan played TCU and they gave up 51. And there was a video that surfaced earlier in the week where Michigan's playing somebody, and Connor Stallions, the guy that was doing this, walks up to the defensive coach and tells him what play the opposing team's going to run, and then the defensive coordinator makes a play call. When that happens, you look kind of guilty. If you have any thoughts on the Michigan fiasco, please feel free to let me know. It's okay to steal signs. Everybody does it. There's a rumor now that starting next year, college football is going to be like the NFL, where the quarterbacks are going to have an earpiece inside their helmet to where the coach tells them to play, so there's no more of all that gyrational sideline stuff. You can steal signs, but you cannot buy a ticket to another team's game and go sit in the crowd and steal their signs. That you cannot do. Again, any thoughts on this, please feel free to let me know. Homes for Our Troops is a publicly funded 501c nonprofit organization that builds and donates specially adapted custom homes nationwide for severely injured post 9/11 veterans. Since the 2004 inception, nearly 90 cents of every dollar spent has gone directly to our program services for veterans. Visit at hfotusa.org. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. I told my friend that an acorn is actually a tree. My friend said, "Really?" In a nutshell, yes. And that does it for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.